Application problems are just a hidden way of saying that we're going to be doing word problems. Now, you can have many, many word problems that deal with systems of equations. In fact, that's one of the most common ways to use a word problem is with systems of equations. It's used quite a bit in the financial world and things like that. So, one of the things that can happen when you have an application problem is that it tells you the slope and the y-intercept. So it tells you a starting point, which would be your y-intercept, and then it tells you how it changes per month, per year, per day, per minute, whatever. And so then you would use that as your slope. And then those two equations become really easy to figure out because of that setup. But when it's not that setup, when it's something else, I would like you to be able to set it up yourself. And so that's what this video is going to be covering, is how to set up the ones that aren't slope-intercept form. Okay, so when you read through a problem, there's two topics that we need to answer. We need to figure out what are our variables, and we're going to make little notes here. So I'd like to see this on your papers when you do this. So we're going to figure out what the variables are, and then we're going to figure out two topics, and I'll explain those in a second. It's the easiest thing to do is to start with the variables, because variables are what you don't know that you want to find out, and the problem should tell you that. So if we look at this problem, we have shoes that are being sold. So a store sold 28 pairs of shoes for a total of $2,220. Style A sold for $70 per pair, and style B sold for $90 per pair. How many of each style were sold? So if I look at this last question, it tells me my variables, and often the question that they ask does tell you the variables. Not every time, but most of the time. So it says how many of each style were sold. We don't know how many of style A was sold, and we don't know how many of style B was sold. So I'm going to use A and B for my variables. I'm going to say A equals the number of style A, and B equals the number of style B. That should be pretty easy for us to remember. A lot of times we use X and Y just because if we have to graph them, then it's easier to graph knowing which one's X and which one's Y right away. But we're not going to graph for this, so we'll just use A and B. Okay, once you know what your variables are, then we can go to topics, because topics are not the same thing as variables. Now, topics are, if you read the problem, let's say from an English standpoint and not the math standpoint and talking about variables, but if you read it from an English standpoint, what are two topics talked about in this problem? So again, let's look through it. A store sold 28 pairs of shoes for a total of $2,220. Style A sold for $70 per pair, and style B sold for $90 per pair. So if I'm looking at topics, one thing I see that blares out at me is that we're talking about money, and one of our topics is going to be money. Now, when you have a topic, you're going to write an equation based on that topic. The other topic starts right away when they tell us that we sold 28 pairs. They're telling us the number of pairs of shoes that we sold. So the other topic is going to be the number of shoes. And now we come up with our equation for those. So money, often what you do is you take the amount of money it's worth times how many of them you bought or sold. So if we're looking at that, style A sells for $70 per pair. So I want to take $70 times the number of A that was sold, plus, I'm going to do that for B. B was sold for $90, so I'm going to take 90 times the number of B that were sold, equals the total amount, which was $2,220. So that's my equation for the price. Notice I didn't put any dollar signs because I really don't need them in the equation themselves. But my answer, if I'm telling the price of something, I'll write a dollar sign. Now, the other equation is the number. Now, a lot of times this is so easy we make it difficult. The number is just as simple as saying the number of A plus the number of B equals the total number of 28 shoes. And now I have my two equations, and typically in a problem you're not just setting it up, you're also solving it, but that's something you can watch in another video, whether you use substitution or elimination, it's up to you. But at this point I just want us to be able to set it up.